Hey, welcome. This is Greg Lewis, your city manager. Welcome to Lebanon in Depth. And today, I am really pleased that I have the Red Cross with us today. We want to bring in our community organizations that serve us regionally, by state, around. As we kind of approach the holiday season, we all start thinking about giving. We also think about helping. And so we're going to try to provide you an opportunity to learn more about organizations as we go through the holiday season. So this is our starter. It's the end of October, but it's all upon us, and it's a good time of the year, at the end of the year, to reflect. We're all inflicted by a whole lot of things. I just finished a blog posting that I put out on Ebola with information about Ebola that we provided us, and so it's amazing the amount of activity we're gaining, and we've had some very bad weather conditions in our areas the last several years, and that has really posed some challenging problems. We're working on our own emergency management plan here in our city of Lebanon. So it's very apropos that we have a chance to visit with our Red Cross and our leadership. And today I'm really pleased to have with us Larry Crist, who is the regional executive for the American Red Cross with us. Larry, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here.
That's really, it's just, we've had a good time just talking before the show, getting a little acquainted about backgrounds and how we came to be. But why don't you share with the public a little bit about how your background, Larry, how you came to be through this process and end up in a position as being an executive with our Red Cross here regionally.
Okay, well, it was a long and winding road, but
Yeah.
I won't make it that long or that winding. I've been with the Red Cross now for a little over 4 years. And prior to that, I worked for state government in Vermont. I was the director of public health preparedness for the state health department. And in that capacity, I had a fair amount of interaction with the Red Cross and was able to see the kind of work that it did. So once I was able to retire from state service, this was just a great opportunity for me to be able to continue the kind of work around emergency preparedness, emergency response. Prior to that, as I mentioned before, I actually grew up in South Louisiana, but I've been here for about 30 years. So
okay.
I almost can come into New Hampshire and Vermont without a passport now.
Well, that's pretty good. I'll never get there from here because only being 4 years in state doesn't count around this neck of the woods. But it's interesting. Red Cross, I don't know if people fully understand how Red Cross, I think, I go back to when I was a child. I would always be happy I used to have this little box for Red Cross, and I would get a little badge, a little tin badge, and I would bend it and I proudly put it on my shirt. And that was out in Kansas where I grew up, and Red Cross. And as I I remember the Red Cross came to see me when I was going off to be drafted in the induction center. The Red Cross came around and gave me toothpaste, and I think they gave me some apples on the way the bus to the induction center. So so I had these ups and downs with the Red Cross. The being drafted and going off the induction center, but the little badge still kind of outweighs my fact of being shipped off. As I grow in my profession, I have had the opportunity as a manager to see how in a time of stress the Red Cross steps up. So I kind of see Red Cross on a day-to-day basis, but I've also seen them in time of stress. One of the most impactful things on me with regard to relationships with Red Cross was when I was a county manager in Beltrami County, Minnesota. I was the manager of that county when the Grand Forks, North Dakota, and East Grand Forks, Minnesota, experienced the overwhelming flood that engulfed their two cities and basically wiped them off the face of the planet. And as a result, people had to evacuate, and 10,000 people from that area evacuated to the Beltrami County in Bemidji, Minnesota, which was a small city, not much larger than Lebanon, about the same size as Lebanon. And here were suddenly 10,000 people moving in our direction, and we had thought we had emergency plans, but we never anticipated that we have an out-migration from another city. So the one that stepped up the plate was the Red Cross. The Red Cross came in and stepped up the plate and became the way through which we partnered and operated in order to meet the needs of those 10,000 people. And of course they came and then they moved on to other places, but but some had more difficult times than others to find a new relocation. So I was so impressed with the Red Cross stepping up the plate and basically saving our bacon, because it was really overwhelming.
And Greg, you make a great point, because that's what most people see in times of disasters. The Red Cross shows up, opens shelters, takes care of people, provides food, hydration. And then on the other end of the spectrum, as you pointed out, and my guess is your Red Cross story goes back further than you know, because we're about the same age.
Yep.
Where did you learn to swim?
Oh, Red Cross swimming. Yes,
right.
I Red Cross swimming at Cary Park in South
Yes.
Hutchinson, Kansas.
And that's how most of us were introduced to the Red Cross, which was through swimming programs. And then, I don't know if you were a Boy Scout. I was.
I was.
As part of a Boy Scouts, you had to do first aid. You had to do a number of trainings. Those were all Red Cross courses. And those kinds of things, and many of us didn't recognize that at the time.
No,
But
I don't think I recognized that, but I remember going through the training and
yes,
getting my badges and stuff like that.
they were all Red Cross courses. And and as an example, I had a first aid course and CPR when I was in the Boy Scouts. Never had to use it. Didn't think I was ever going to use it. In fact, didn't think I remembered it. And then some 20 years later, I happened to be driving through a rural area of Georgia, came upon a burning house, went in with a friend and carried 2 people out of that house and had to resuscitate them. One of the people lived as a result. Unfortunately, the other person died. But had I not had the course 20 years earlier, I would have had no clue what I was doing.
You thought of some retention.
Absolutely.
About some basics.
And that's one of the things that, the Red Cross has really helped prepare people in many ways that most of us don't even recognize, because for a lot of us it was years ago. But one other comment relative to your describing the flooding that you experienced as a town manager. Most folks don't realize this, because when we think of the 1927 floods in Vermont and New Hampshire, we really focus on Vermont and New Hampshire. And what many people don't realize is that the major part of the 1927 floods was through the Mississippi River Valley.
Oh, wow.
And during that period, 1927 and 1928, the Red Cross sheltered 500,000 people for 12 solid months.
Wow.
And tents and barges on the Mississippi River and on the levees, because there was no other land. And can you imagine trying to do that in 1927 and 1928?
How
And
difficult.
the Red Cross was the only national organization that could mount that kind of response. And that goes into today, whether it's Hurricane Sandy, whether it's Tropical Storm Irene, or whether it's localized flooding like Lebanon experienced last year.
That was horrendous here in Lebanon, to have that localized flooding. I remember looking out I was driving back. I was out doing some things for the city, and it looked like there was a god up there with a garden hose, just dropping
Yes.
water in a rather narrow focused area right on the particular area that what turned out to be Slayton Hill and the area around it, and then coming down and then hitting the street below Dulac very hard. So that was an excruciating experience, and it was fixed in terms of the size, but it really did some damage on Storrs Hill where the ski slope is, and it did some damage at the airport. And that was really just something that I'd not seen before. I've seen a lot of different weather events, but I had not seen that particular weather event.
And we are seeing more of those kinds of events, in large part because we are experiencing something of a disruption in our climate, where we're getting generally more water, more rain, but it's also coming in more concentrated forms. And particularly in Vermont and New Hampshire, which is the areas that I'm most concerned with, we have the valleys. And you only get valleys when you have hills and mountains, and the water just comes pouring down off of those. And when you match that with really localized, intense rainfall, you get the kind of penetration that you see where a whole neighborhood can either become cut off or washed out, or any number of things. And even with Tropical Storm Irene in Vermont, it wasn't as though the whole state of Vermont was flooded. It was select communities, primarily in the valleys next to the rivers, that were severely damaged, But you could go just a couple of miles outside of that area and you wouldn't see any problems. So it's a different kind of weather event that we're experiencing now. But regardless of whether it's a neighborhood that winds up being flooded, or whether it's an entire community as you described, or whether it's 500,000 people through a variety of states, the fascinating thing is that all of those people that you see with the Red Cross vests on and providing the sheltering services, the feeding services, just the emotional support are volunteers. They're all local volunteers. We have fewer than 25 paid Red Cross employees in New Hampshire and Vermont. We have roughly something in the range of 2,000 to 2,500 volunteers. Without the volunteers, there's no Red Cross. And those are your neighbors, my neighbors. In some cases, it's me, and in some cases, it could be you. If there is an event that happens, you step forward and say, I'd like to help. We can train you in time. You can assist, and then you go back to your day-to-day life. But that's the amazing thing, and that's nationwide. So if we have a problem in one community here, we pull volunteers from other communities. We can pull them from other states. We can pull them from across the country if we need to.
That's really amazing. Logistically, that must be quite a challenge. I mean, I always think about, in terms of, managing groups of workforce, which has been what I've been doing, leading and managing workforce groups of various and sundry sizes. And it's quite challenging to go through the logistics of making sure people are properly trained, have the proper tools, and really have the kind of expectations in terms of standards of what they should do in circumstances, sometimes that being really stressful. And you could just see it, cradle to grave, following the life of a beginning of a volunteer to the consummation of being able to do the job, and then to the experience of it, and then the aftermath of experiencing volunteer work in stressful conditions.
Right, absolutely. And not everyone is suited to do emergency response, if you would, but everyone has some skill set that they can bring, whether it's helping with administrative processing, or whether it's working in a shelter, or whether it's distributing foodstuffs and driving through the night in difficult weather. There's a role for almost everyone, and it takes almost every role to be able to make a large event come out the way we all want it to come out. And there are, as an example, for the average Red Cross volunteer, there are 5 basic courses that the person needs to complete to be able to be fairly well-rounded in how they help their neighbors. And it's not rocket science, but there is a little bit of art and science to it. And you're right, it's a gigantic project to maintain that many volunteers, to make sure that people stay active enough so that they remain proficient in what they do. I tell a story from time to time that, like many people in the listening audience, I have a riding lawnmower that has a mowing deck on it, and I take the mowing deck off each fall so I can put a snowblower on it, and then come springtime I put the mowing deck back on. And I never remember how the mowing deck goes back on.
Yeah, that's my story as well.
Because I only do it twice a year.
Yeah.
Well, that's the same thing applies to preparedness and emergency response. You have to practice on a regular basis so that when you're called upon to do it, you can do it. And we actually have some volunteer jobs where folks may not be called upon for a year, 2 years, or even 3 years to perform their function. Now that's a minority of the volunteer roles, but we have a group of people who say, that's what I want to be able to do. So I'm going to practice every month or every 2 months, even though I know I might not be called upon for a while. Because when I am called upon, I want to be ready.
Yeah, being ready. One of the things that I really support, and I hope we can move forward on in our community, as we move forward in other communities where I've been a manager, was that every individual, every family unit, however it's composed, has a plan.
Yes.
in addressing these matters. And then I know that I'm sure that the Red Cross, the FEMA, other organizations can provide people with examples of what plans would look like or how to do planning. And then they exercise that plan, because
Right.
as you're mentioning, that if you don't exercise, you're not going to be proficient and ready to be prepared whatever's thrown your way, and I think that's really
Yes.
key.
Absolutely, and you're right. There are many organizations where you can go on websites, you can get hard copy material to explain how to build a family plan, how to build a personal plan. You know, one of the easiest ways, of course, is to go on the internet to www.redcross.org, with Red Cross being one word, and that will take you to a host of sites, Red Cross sites, where you can find examples of family plans, examples of business plans, and how to prepare yourself so that you don't become a victim, but that you're able to help other people who may be
Yes.
in greater distress
And that's
than
really
you are.
critical, because if you become a victim, then you are going to be in need of assistance.
That's correct.
And it's going to be difficult for you to assist others if you become a victim. So that's why we
Absolutely.
should be ready ourselves to try to prevent that.
And that's not a hard thing to do. I mean, it really isn't. And if you go onto the Red Cross website, I think you can find that it's just very straightforward points of these are the things you should have, as an example, in a bag in your home. Everyone should know where that bag is. And everyone should know, as an example, where they're to meet if there is some crisis in the house, or where they're to meet if there's a crisis outside, when they're away from the home and they need to gather. Those are just the kinds of things to think through ahead of time, because it makes it a lot easier when everyone knows that everyone's okay.
That's those terrific words of recommendation. Now, could you tell us a little bit about the Red Cross activities that are ongoing, pending? And I guess you can be micro in terms of the day-to-day type of activities Red Cross engages in, or you can raise it up to another macro level about the kinds of things. It's such a challenging world we're in, right? And it's probably always been a challenging world, but it seems like it's has some critical challenges that seem to have it's a very I don't know, Armageddon-like, where people, and I think a lot of that's psychological, and I think that we need to be better within ourselves and working with others to recognize that these are things that generations and generations have faced different challenging things. And if you can I always say let's pull together, not apart. And so if we can pull together and face these things. But I'm interested in the Red Cross's world right now, both on the mini level and then on the larger level.
Sure. Well, we'll start locally, and then we will work our way up through the chain. I think locally, as an example, the way the Red Cross operates is we have in geographic areas what we call disaster action teams. The Upper Valley has had a disaster action team for decades now, and the volunteers come from both sides of the river. So in this case, the Upper Valley Disaster Action Team actually has 6 people on it from the town of Lebanon. And there are 6 citizens of Lebanon who participate on the team. There are folks from the Vermont side as well, folks from Hanover, a number of other communities. And they practice on a regular basis being able to assist people if there's a home fire or a neighborhood flooding, as we talked about earlier. And their job is really to go to those scenes to assist the people who have been stricken by whatever the disaster is. And let's say it's a home fire. Their primary goal is to make sure that those folks who have been the victim of a home fire are taken care of immediately. So if it happens in the middle of the night, the disaster action team works through with the individuals what their needs are, usually gets them into a hotel right away, provides them with the basics. As you described when you were in the service, you were given a toothbrush and an apple. As I think about it, there probably was a connection during those days between a toothbrush and an apple. But nonetheless, in this instance, we would make sure, let's say your home burned, that you had a place to go to that night. If you don't have friends or relatives whom you could stay with, we would put you in a hotel. Would not cost you anything. Those are donor dollars that support that process. We would also make sure that you had, if depending on the season and the time of year, if you lost all your clothing, which often happens, then we would provide you with enough clothing to be able to take care of yourself, basic hygiene articles, and as well as providing you with the money for food for a certain period of time, until you could begin to get back on your feet. There's also emotional counseling involved, which most of us don't think a lot about with regard to home fires.
Yeah.
But imagine leaving your house in the morning
Yeah.
and going back in the afternoon and there's nothing there. All your photographs are gone.
Yeah.
All your mementos of raising your children are gone.
Quite a loss.
It is. It's a huge loss. So that is really at the lowest common denominator. That's the Red Cross. It's neighbors helping neighbors. The next step up become groups of those people who come together when we need to open a shelter. So as an example, there's been a shelter open in Lebanon, I think maybe twice in the last 2 years because of the neighborhood flooding that occurred. And in those instances, it's a basic shelter. One of the things that I say is when you're right in the middle of a disaster, you want to be in a Red Cross shelter. As soon as the disaster's over, you want to be out of the Red Cross shelter.
Yeah,
because
I can relate to that completely.
yes, it's not a 5-star hotel,
Yep.
but it's a place to be able to take care of people who really need assistance at the time. But it takes a group of people to run a shelter and to make sure a shelter is adequate, that it can take care of people's needs, and that it's safe to be in. And we're very fortunate in this area that the town of Lebanon has been very gracious in providing a structure for shelters to be opened in, and we have a very good working relationship with the town, with the police department, the fire department, and those things make a huge difference. But that takes people to maintain those relationships, and it takes people to be able to open shelters and work in the shelters. Now I'll take it one step higher. This may come as a surprise, hopefully not a surprise to you, but in the event of an evacuation around Vermont Yankee, the expectation is if it was a complete evacuation of the 10-mile emergency planning zone, there would be roughly 30,000 people on the Vermont side who would be evacuating. In the past, before the accident at Fukushima, the thought was that those people could all be housed within, say, 15 miles of Vernon. Fukushima showed us that that is too close, that if you do that, you run the risk of having to move people a number of times. So what the Red Cross did a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, is we embarked upon a new sheltering program where we have 26 large shelters identified now. They begin in Rutland and they end in Hanover. So we would have roughly 6,000 of those 30,000 people are expected to need sheltering. Those people would all be moving, as you mentioned earlier with the flooding further west.
Right.
People here haven't thought a whole lot about what would happen if people came if there was a problem in Vermont Yankee. Well, the reality is there are shelters that are now envisioned so that they can be opened here. We have the equipment to do that. And we could have 6,000 evacuees in shelters, in addition to many tens of thousands who would be with friends in hotels and in hotels. So that becomes a much bigger sheltering initiative. Just for perspective, if we ever had that occurrence, and it's a very slight occurrence, but it is a potential, and we have to be prepared for it, we would be sheltering more people than were sheltered for Hurricane Sandy in New York City. Wow. Think about that for a moment.
That's a very significant number.
And it requires a lot of volunteers. And some would be regular Red Cross volunteers, but many would be just-in-time volunteers, people who for that event would come forward and say, teach me in 2 hours what I need to know to be able to work in a shelter. And we have the ability to do that. Then you take that and ratchet it up yet again, because that's a very big event.
Oh yeah, that's a huge one. Really.
It is. It's a huge event. But imagine that you have multiple large events happening around the country simultaneously. Just as we saw last night, night before, the tornadoes down in some of the southwestern states. Imagine if we had fires going on the West Coast, as they seem to go on all the time, tornadoes in the Midwest, and tornadoes in the Southeast, as well as some problem along the East Coast. We would be opening shelters across the country. And that then requires thousands of volunteers to come forward. The Red Cross has the structure, the infrastructure to be able to manage those kinds of people and manage that equipment. In our region alone, just on the Vermont and New Hampshire Upper Valley side, we have the equipment, as I said before, to shelter 6,000 people. That's on mobile trailers, it's in stockpiles and in warehouses. We have vehicles that can move that equipment where it needs to go at a moment's notice. Most of the equipment, or much of the equipment, is actually on site. It is near those shelters. So we'll have a shelter trailer in a community, and we have one in this community, so that it's really just a matter of moving something a half mile or a mile, and then you have the ability to do it. And you use local volunteers to set that up. Internationally, because we've now covered the nation, look at Haiti. Haiti is a great example. The Red Cross has been actively involved in Haiti for over 2 years now.
Yeah, that's been going on a long time. I know there's still projects, I'm aware of them, still going on in Haiti, and there's a lot of need.
There is a lot of need, and that continues with Red Cross teams being there, and to take care of really the tens and hundreds of thousands of people who have not yet been able to get on their feet. Those are the kinds of things that we think about. What a lot of people don't realize is that the Red Cross runs an international measles prevention program. There are Red Cross workers around the planet who work to eradicate measles, and something we don't think a whole lot about.
No, I don't think we do. I mean, but measles elsewhere as a severely, it's a significant disease.
It is, and we actually have, in addition to things like measles, we have Red Cross volunteers. You have 2 volunteers just in the Hanover, Lebanon area who have spent considerable amounts of time in other countries providing disaster relief. I can think of 2 volunteers right now who have logged thousands of hours in Haiti, in Vietnam, in the Philippines. These are all places where local volunteers have gone to bring their technical assistance and their ability to help folks who are really in jeopardy.
That's really good. I think that was really remarkably well done in capturing the kind of you could just see it's just this whole interface, this interrelatedness, and the differing levels and the mission of the Red Cross. Now, in our last few minutes together, Larry, why don't you? So I'm a person that's interested in becoming involved in the Red Cross. So how do I, as an individual, go about involving myself in the Red Cross?
Sure, you can.
Last 2 minutes.
Okay, we can do this very quickly, and then I want to touch on a couple of other Red Cross services that I did not reference earlier.
Okay.
But very quickly, if someone wants to volunteer, you can make a telephone call to our offices. You can call, it's area code 802-660-9130. Once you make that call, you'll be in touch with our volunteer services program. They will then direct you to a local office who can work with you and help you decide what it is you want to do and how to get you enrolled in classes. Or you can go onto the website, www.redcross.org, and look for Vermont and New Hampshire and gather the same information. That's the easiest way to do it, and it's the quickest way to get tied to whether it's a local disaster action team or a shelter team or some other team.
That's a nice capsule. It sounds easy. We'll make sure we get that on the website, make sure that we have in the video. In our last minute here, you mentioned you have a couple of other services at Red Cross. We should leave the public with that understanding.
Right, because we started the discussion really dealing with disasters. But the Red Cross is much more than disasters. It's also preparation for disasters. So CPR courses, first aid courses, all of these kinds of activities continue, and they continue unabated within the Red Cross. People can find out about those classes by contacting the same webpage number and the same phone number that I gave. And then the longest standing Red Cross activity is service to the armed forces. And the Red Cross continues to provide a great deal of service to members of the armed forces and their families. That was particularly needed during the height of the deployments to the Middle East, but it continues to be a very active part of what the Red Cross does, and especially given the fact that we have veterans hospitals in both Vermont and New Hampshire. So those are all activities that the Red Cross remains committed to and very much involved with. So there's a lot of opportunity for folks who would like to be involved and involved with being a neighbor who helps a neighbor.
Thank you very much, Larry. I think we all have a message out of this, and that is that as a neighbor, we should help our neighbors. And I think as a community, we need to pull together, and as a region, we need to pull together. And across our two states that are twin states, we should pull together. And then just going further and further, the more I think that if we can be stronger and wiser if we pull together. And the Red Cross is a great mechanism for this. And I would urge everyone that's hearing this here in Lebanon, our residents and those in the region, to see what you can do to get involved and look into the Red Cross as an opportunity to be involved and look at supporting the Red Cross, both as a volunteer and also as a person, in times of trouble, we all should pull together. Each of us have something to give, whether it's dollar bills or whether it's our time.
Right.
And each are very valuable. So thank you again, Larry. Best luck to the Red Cross. We are here in Lebanon in depth, and in depth includes our Red Cross, both locally and both our states, regionally and nationally. So let's support the Red Cross. Thanks.